Greetings, and welcome to Xenos Analysis. I am Colonel Ichabod Rhombus, and today we will be looking at one of the more wantonly brutal weapons in the arsenal of the hive mind, the Carnifex. When the foul species dubbed by the Imperium of Man as Tyranid first arrived in our galaxy, it did so with a range of bioforms that were adapted for war against whatever species were last consumed by the hive fleets. As they were introduced to what it means to fight in this new theater of war, the bioforms were quickly redesigned and reinforced to ensure victory. Some changes were minor. Others, like those instigated for the Carnifex, were far more radical. First encountered as Hive Fleet Behemoth closed relentlessly upon the crag, the Imperium endeavored to halt the Tyranid advance before it made planetfall, and so sought their destruction in space. These grotesques were deployed in every boarding action, and while their ululating howls were terrifying to hear, this signal was merely a byproduct of their generation of lethal bolts of bioplasma that they hurled into the defenders. After vomiting their searing bolts of plasma, the hulking behemoths brought 4 utterly titanic claws to bear, and thus further contributed horrendous levels of wanton slaughter. Soon after, it seems that this singular design was modified to allow a broader range of offensive capabilities. The creature became more humanoid in appearance. Its head was lifted from within its torso and was encased in a solid helm of chitin with 2 large tusks. Also, its 4 appendages could now be grown with the full range of brutal bioweapons that the Tyranids can boast. The current incarnation of this monstrous fiend weighs in at around 9 tons, and it admirably fulfills the role of heavy assault, charging forward and slamming its chitin-encrusted bulk into the fray, or by laying down devastating barrages of heavy bioweapon-ranged fire. A great chitin shell embraces its back, the dense plates all but impervious to small arms fire. Even when brought down, the Carnifex is not to be treated with anything other than fear, for in its death throes it can lash out, and still have those within its vicinity join it in death. The beasts are superlatively equipped for close-quarter combat. Most commonly, it is encountered with scything talons. These fused razor-edged chitin claws are capable of gouging open flesh and tearing apart solid objects with exemplary ease. It can also be grown with crushing claws. These are crab-like appendages whose astonishing strength grant them the ability to rip readily through even the thickest layers of armor and inflict the most grotesque levels of damage. The crushing claw has been the bane of Imperial armor, the Carnifex often throwing itself into tanks and other armor, and as the vehicle reels from the shock, it is literally ripped apart by these hideously efficient weapons. While the limbs and fang-filled maw of the Carnifex are the primary threats, fear its tail as well, for when armed with a thresher's scythe, this weighted blade-armed bludgeon can be thrown into combat to shred and pummel. The tail can be rendered even more lethal with the addition of a bone mace, the spiked heavy ball of doom being far more lethal and able to rip through armor with far more alacrity. When equipped with huge tusks, the charge of the Carnifex becomes even more appalling, for as the ground shudders under its massive weight and heavy hoofbeats, it lowers its head under a chitin shell, presents its tusks, and then these bone javelins act as a razor-edged battering ram, powered by the impetus of the beast to carve through ranks of troops, or simply slide effortlessly into an armored transport. While the Carnifex can be considered somewhat slow and cumbersome, when bequeathed adrenal glands by the whims of the hive mind, these organs flood its system with chemicals to boost metabolism and catapult it into a state of near frenzy. In such a state, the Carnifex is faster and considerably stronger. Like many other bioforms, The Carnifex can be adorned with toxin sacs. These parasitic glands contain numerous small mites that feed on the host organism. The damage they do to the host is negligible, but as they consume Carnifex flesh, they secrete a potent poison that coats the innate weapons of the Tyranid, not only causing grievous additional mayhem, but they are also laden with the phage cells of the Tyranids, that, as we have seen in other lectures, quickly break down and liquefy organic material into a slurry for the Hive fleets to repurpose and reuse in their endless, ravenous crusade. Its massive maw can also be filled with special glands to produce and hold a potent acidic slime. When vomited onto those before it, the ooze eats through all types of matter in mere seconds, dissolving even ceramite, and turning living flesh into an inert, bubbling sludge. When riddled with ranks of chitin thorns, the razor-edged needles on every aspect of the physique ease the passage of its many weapons through defensive armor. The beast's chitin shell can be adorned with a symbiotic life form that grows spore cysts. Lodged in the chitin, they heave and surge, spewing clouds of spores around the Carnifex, obscuring it on the battlefield and hampering the target of the fiends as they rampage and rush into close-quarter exchange. And the senses of the Carnifex can be sharpened, giving them a keener eye should the needs of the Hive fleet deem it necessary to arm these hulks with ranged weapons, of which it has a terrifying repertoire. While the Screamer Killer still remains a solid and stable variant of Carnifex, with bioplasmic scream and 4 scything talons, the standard Carnifex can still be grown with one of these fell weapons as part of its arsenal, allowing it to hurl a seething ball of superheated plasma that explodes into the enemy ranks, melting defenses and tearing apart living tissue. They can be armed with a pair of Devourers. These weapons are a fleshy construct, intentionally created in a state of putrefaction, this decomposing state being necessary to subdue their living ammunition, the horrendous brain leech worms. A bioelectric charge expels them at speed, and awoken and invigorated by the charge, the leech worms immediately and expectantly begin to exude a potent acid that helps them adhere to whatever they hit. The acid dissolves clothing and even armor, and when the worms sense the proximity of ripe flesh after having dwelt in the rotten hive, they explode into frenzied activity. The brain leech worm acquires its unsettling identification from its singular hunger, that of cranial matter. They bore through flesh and organs, making their way with all haste to the cranial vault, whereupon they enter a feeding frenzy. The cracks and gurgles from a seething skull echo over the victim's anguished screams and can shatter the courage of even the most stalwart troop as they experience a most excruciating death. They can also be manufactured with a death spitter. This bioweapon has a muscular channel which uses intense contractions to launch a lethal Slimer maggot from a reservoir of such creatures. The muscles can propel it much further than the Devourer, and the Slimer maggot exudes potent acidic slime that dissolves flesh, bone, and armor with appalling ease. Bestowed with an awful self-replication, once they strike a target, they burrow into it, devouring biomass and using it to divide and grow, multiplying at incredible speeds as the doomed target is eaten from the inside out, while swelling and bursting from the wriggling population of Slimer maggots infesting their tortured physique. Biocannon are also grown for the anatomy of a Carnifex. The Stranglethorn cannon is the considerably larger and more powerful version of the Barb Strangler. Seeds are fed into the main tube of muscles, and like the Death Spitter, they flex and propel the seeds over great distances. Upon impact, they leap into life, sending out probing roots and tendrils in all directions, growing rapidly to crack, shred, and wreak havoc on their immediate surroundings. The second is the heavy venom cannon, which uses an electrostatic charge to hurl crystal shards at enormous speed and over significant distances. The initial high-velocity impact can punch through even the most vigorous defenses, but anything not killed by this trauma now faces a dual second assault as the crystal shards dissolve and spill a powerful substance that is both a mighty corrosive agent that can dissolve metal and even stone, but also a vicious poison lethal to all life forms. No examination of a Tyranid bioform appears complete without addressing the sterling advancements they have made since emerging from the Atarius conflict. Recently, Carnifex have been encountered exhibiting a power from a list of new physiologies that are allowing them to become true brutes of destruction and promiscuous massacre on the battlefield. Examination of some of the most resilient Carnifex, ones brought down by the most withering barrages of heavy weapon fire, to the aghast disgust of those investigating these carcasses, it has been found that the massive armored carapace is actually a completely separate organism, boosting metabolism, devoted to hardening and reinforcing the chitin. Such Carnifex are almost invincible. Other Carnifex cadavers that exhibited preternatural levels of endurance before being felled have been found with a massive internal sac. This is filled with adrenostimulants. A series of vascular channels pump this potent chemical soup into the anatomy of the Carnifex, causing it to shrug off even the most grievous injuries. The chitin carapace has also been found to be encrusted with layers of extra ablative material. These additional plates absorb small arms fire, meaning that massed ranks of standard attacks are unlikely to cause anything but the most trivial of injuries. Ultra-conductive tissue has been found to gift the Carnifex with unnatural reflexes, such that it can explode into combat with a swiftness unmatched by all but the most enhanced and vigorous of foes. Other mental improvements allow a Carnifex to act with similar impossible speed, to leap from the ranks of the Tyranid swarm and preemptively intercept enemy forces before they can engage the Tyranid lines. It has also been reported that a single Carnifex stood amongst the swarm and seemingly compelled them to stand to the very last, while also causing acute distress to those psychers unfortunate enough to approach them. It was found that significant reworking of the cerebral architecture of the Carnifex had empowered it with the synapse might of the higher forms of Tyranid, and caused it to radiate not only the power of the synaptic link, but the disruptive field that is the shadow in the warp. Swollen biochemical sacs have been found on certain Carnifex that have been manufactured with ranged weapons. Acting like adrenal glands, they feed the very ammunition that the weapons discharge, causing the various worms, leeches, and crystals to throb with additional potency and vitality, causing them to commit their atrocious acts of carnage with new lethality and efficacy. And lastly, at least for now, for who knows what odious abilities will be developed next, the Carnifex punishes cowardice in those it faces, and does so with a viciousness beyond that of the most pious commissar. Those who seek to flee its mists are targeted with a speed beyond reckoning, and their cowardice results in a justified, violent, and ignoble demise. The Carnifex can be equipped with a vast array of different weapons and innate anatomical abilities, and while there are several distinct sub-variants that show no such variety, namely the previously mentioned Screamer Killer, the heavily armored Thornback, and the Stone Crusher Carnifex, that is equipped to shatter the most hardened targets on the battlefield, for which is equipped with a giant demolishing wrecker claws and jagged, spike-encrusted and highly destructive bioflails. There is, however, a possible singular individual and unique organism in the Tyranid swarm, although, much like the Swarm Lord and the Death Leaper, it may well be that it is just a variant, one that is used sparingly. When Hive Fleet Behemoth assailed the ultramarine world of Calth, a particularly huge Carnifex spearheaded the drive into the Imperial lines. Tanks were cleaved in twain, bodies burst under its stamping hooves. Its scything talons and crushing claws dripped with gore and wet gobs of torn meat. The devastation being wrought by this aberration was halted only by an instance of almost impossible good fortune. A single plasma pistol shot ripped through the beast's right eye and bored deep into its brain, felling it instantly. As history was to unveil, this was no cause for celebration, but a moment to bitterly regret. Either by intent or accidental mutation, a ferocious and unstoppable power of regeneration was activated, meaning that this was the last time this particular Carnifex was ever brought down again. Decades after the War of Calth was won and the Tyranid forces were believed eradicated, a band of smugglers came across a vast shape encased in ice. Greedy to benefit from the sale of this cadaver, they thawed it out. The restorative might in its flesh activated, and its body healed all but the destroyed eye. And then, this now one-eyed Carnifex erupted into full activity. Separated from the influence of the hive mind, it resorted to its basic Tyranid purpose: to kill, to destroy, to annihilate all that is not Tyranid. The cycloptic beast slaughtered the smugglers and turned its homicidal urges on the rest of the world. Convoys were devastated. Whole populations were slaughtered. No matter what retaliation or defense it encountered, no matter how massive the trauma inflicted upon it, the wounds closed before the attacker's eyes, chitin sealed back over, and the monster arose once more to recommence its drive to eradicate all life. Termagants, Hormagants, and gene stealers that had been lying dormant in ruins and underground locations felt the presence of this Carnifex and arose to fall in behind it. While not part of this synaptic broadcast that gives the swarm such singular and unwavering purpose, the Carnifex still caused these lesser beasts to rampage into the midst of the Imperial denizens. Calth was being drenched in woe from a single bioform, and so a scout sergeant from the Ultramarines intervened. Sergeant Tellian found the monster's hide as impenetrable as all the other Imperial forces had, but as he faced joining the piles of rent flesh that was all that remained of the local population, a nearly impossible sniper shot entered the ruined eye socket and bit deep. Howling, the beast wavered and tumbled into a nearby ravine, falling ever down and vanishing into the dark abyssal depths. Since then, old One-Eye has continued to age and defy all attempts to end it once and for all. It has brought horror to Ultramar, and when brought down has only healed and arisen again. The beast of Calth was most recently encountered on Tartarus in the Cryptus system. Marching with Hive Fleet Leviathan, the Cadian heavy weapons found little purchase on its impossibly dense hide. That which successfully penetrated caused the flesh to ripple and animate, sealing back over in seconds. The battle ended in an apocalyptic fashion when it threw itself into the void shield generators, protecting the world from grueling solar storms. The resulting explosion and the swallowing of the world by the storms incinerated its surface and rendered it barren and uninhabitable. It can be theorized that even the lethal kiss of a rampaging star was unable to overwhelm the unimaginably powerful regenerative properties of the old One-Eye creature and allow it to recover and be redeployed. Alternately, perhaps it is merely a template, one replicated again and again by the various Hive fleets. The regenerative anatomy of Old One-Eye is sterling to say the least, but it is definitely not unique, and while exceedingly rare, it has been detected in other elite bioforms. The signature visage of a one-eyed Carnifex has crafted a fearsome reputation, one that can be used to unnerve and intimidate. The tales of Old One-Eye and the futility of standing against it have been spread throughout the Imperium, and give the hive mind access to a psychological weapon to further terrify those for whom their great devourer has finally come. But no matter what the foul hive mind conjures to try and break our spirit and destroy our bodies, stand firm, endure for the Imperium, and fight for the God Emperor, beloved by all.